Thanks for joining us. We are the Coalition of Longmeadow, organizing substance education for the town of Longmeadow. My name is Paul McNeil. I coordinate the Close Community Coalition, and we're proud to bring you this virtual parent training on Zoom, a taste of motivational interviewing with John Brelsford, PhD. It's a different way to talk with your teens about difficult subjects. And our featured and distinguished guest is the John Brelsford, PhD. He's a licensed mental health clinician. He is a member of MINT, the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers, and he's been offering training in motivational interviewing for the past 10 years. John currently has a therapy practice in East Hampton and has over 40 years of experience in the human services field, working with people with psychiatric and substance use disorders. John, thank you so much for being with us.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
We've worked with you before. We had a great turnout and a great session training parents of teens in Longmeadow a little over a year ago. And so we're excited to get this on film and share this with as many people as possible, as we're still doing a lot more remote learning and distance education. So thanks so much. I want to jump right in, and you are the expert, so I'm going to let you do a vast majority of the talking. Let's start off with, what is motivational interviewing?
All right. So let me start with the definition, which is just motivational interviewing is a conversation designed to strengthen an individual's motivation for and movement toward a specific goal by eliciting and exploring the person's own reasons for change within an atmosphere of acceptance and compassion. So there's a lot in that, but basically motivational interviewing is, as the title suggests, focused on motivation. A lot of attempts to help people change kind of jump from defining the problem and then talking about the solution. In motivational interviewing, rather than try to go to the solution, first, a lot of effort and time will be spent on helping the person get in touch with their motivation for doing it. Many changes that we undertake, whether it's our relationship to alcohol or other substances or diet or exercise habits, we feel ambivalent about. Part of us wants to change, but we have reasons not to change as well. So MI is kind of aimed at helping people build their sense of importance to make the change before undertaking the change itself.
So it's really someone feeling inspired to make a change themselves instead of someone else sort of, making them change for them. So it really is an individual choice and an individual effort. Yeah,
I mean, a key element of MI is just respect for autonomy, that nobody else can make anyone change. I'm glad that I get to make decisions about what I change or don't change, and I'm happy that the people I work with get to make that decision for themselves.
And that leads beautifully into my next question, which it's what's the difference between trying to instill motivation and trying to evoke motivation for change?
Yeah, so I guess first, it depends on whether you kind of accept the notion that the motivation to change is already in each of us, that it doesn't need to be instilled, but it may well need to be uncovered. And that's an assumption. I don't know of any proof of that assertion. But if you start with that assumption, then our job is to call it forth. And there's a quote that I like a lot from Blaise Pascal, which is a French philosopher in the 17th century, who just said, people are generally better persuaded by the reasons which they themselves have discovered than by those that have come into the minds of others. I love that quote. It's just that I think we kind of know that when we hit upon an idea, we're much more likely to kind of follow through on that than when other people make suggestions to us. So MI really kind of learned to capitalize on that, and the approach of MI is aimed at eliciting motivation from people, helping themselves hear themselves make the argument to change. That MI has been described as helping people talk themselves into changing.
So it has very little to do with having someone tell someone else what to
Right.
change or how to change.
Right.
Okay.
To help somebody do that, I don't actually need any expertise in what they should do. I need, there are times where I do have that expertise and maybe that helps, but more often it's just helping people hear themselves and inspire themselves.
And as far as the spirit of motivational interviewing, that's something that we worked on with our training in the past. The idea of sort of embodying the spirit of motivational interviewing, because these parents aren't going to be technically certified or trained in motivational interviewing, but they're going to have a real good grasp of the ideas of it and the tenets of it. And so, would you have any advice for someone embarking on learning the practices of motivational interviewing?
Yeah, so we kind of have this ritual at this point at the beginning of the trainings, is that I encourage people to actually in the training to yell the phrase, "What the heck?" And the point of that is, it's what the heck, just try it. And that to kind of approach any new learning with that idea, we are no doubt going to make tons of mistakes as we learn something new. When we learned to ride our bicycles, we fell off many times. Those of us who learned to play the piano made a whole host of mistakes. That's just part of the process. So the first thing is just to be open to that and just jump in and try it. And if it's something that feels important to you and you want to learn it, you can learn it. And you're going to make a bunch of mistakes along the way. But those mistakes are great teachers, right? When we do something that doesn't work, we can learn something from that and do it differently the next time. So keeping that, not beating yourself up for not already being expert at something you just got introduced to. So that would be, for people who want to learn a new kind of intricate skill, that attitude helps a lot.
And not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Good, right.
Yeah. And in our training, you have participants describe some things that they've experienced in their conversations with their own children or students that they would like to experience less often than they do, and some things that they would like to experience more often than they currently do. Why do you do that?
Well, it's actually the first kind of taste of MI. In this situation, the change that is under consideration is, do I want to bother to learn MI? And I don't think there's any reason to want to learn MI other than if you think it's going to help you with something important for you. So I ask people early in the training to think about what are some things that happen that you really wish just didn't happen as much between you and your child, and what are some things that happen sometimes that you would love to see happen more often. And parents, we've all got our list of those things. We end up in these frustrating struggles. Our kids are mad at us. We feel ineffectual, are some of the things on my list that I would have liked to happen less. And on the other hand, there are times where, we feel like we're connected. We're really collaborating on a problem. We feel our kids are coming to us and paying attention, to the advice we have to offer. We'd like more of that. So those actually are the motivations that a person might have to change. In this case, to learn MI. But just that's an example of how MI goes about it, to help people hear their own motivations. And so we start the training just by doing that.
And you ask participants to think of somebody who has had a profound or positive impact on their life, like a parent or a relative or a teacher or coach or counselor, a religious, spiritual leader, even, a workplace supervisor. I wanted to ask you, so who would you say has had a profound impact on your life, Dr. Brelsford? And what was it about them that accounts for that impact or the affect on you?
Well, thank you, because I love talking about this guy. And coincidentally, the guy I'm going to talk about is a Longmeadow resident.
Oh, no way. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a guy that I worked with at the VA hospital. My first job in human services was up at the Leeds VA hospital. I was a nurse's aide. And the guy I'm talking about was a guy who was the ward psychologist. And I think the fact that he was a psychologist had very little to do with his impact on me. He was also a runner and a very good basketball player. And at the time I ran into him, I was a pretty depressed young guy. I was in my mid-20s. I was not feeling at all good about myself. I was smoking cigarettes. I just was not in a good spot. And this guy kind of took a look at me, and from my point of view, just started giving me what I needed. He was, among other things, he got me to start running, and he would take me out at lunchtime every day. We had a half-hour lunch break, and we just played one-on-one basketball. And in the beginning, he just kicked my butt on a real regular basis. He was much, much better than I was, and in much better shape than I was. But over time, I got in better shape, and he actually taught me a lot about basketball. And it got to the point that I could play him even up and, beat him sometimes. So, and it's interesting, he's somebody that gave me a ton of advice. And as we'll talk about in MI, we kind of de-emphasize advice. That's, but when we do this exercise about this influential person, and I ask the question, what was it about the person that accounts for their impact on you? And when I answer that question about this guy, it was not his advice, even though his advice was very good and I tried really hard to follow his advice. But the thing that opened me up to his advice was the way he saw me, that he recognized in me some potential. I couldn't figure out why he took an interest in me, because I didn't think I was worth his time. But I could tell that he was interested. He saw something in me. He accepted me. He was not judgmental. He made fun of me on a regular basis, but it was kind of loving fun. It was fine. And it was just accepting, and it opened me up. And it was those attributes that I think made me want to take his advice. So in terms of, helping, if I do have some advice I want to give to somebody, I want to make sure they understand that that's coming from a non-judgmental, accepting place, and it's to be very clear that it's their right to take my advice or leave it. So this guy in Long Meadow, as far as I haven't seen him for 10 years, I assume he's still in Long Meadow.
It's probably in the same house.
I bet.
There's a lot of lifers in Long Meadow. A lot of people, and then people leave and then they'll come right back. I was gonna follow up a little bit about what part of your relationship with this individual what part of your relationship did they strengthen or bring out or help to grow or reassure?
For me, my confidence just grew immensely. I was, as a kid, I was very shy and, didn't take a lot of chances or risks, positive chances or risks. And kind of by virtue of that, my confidence, my sense that I could afford to make a mistake, right? If, that wasn't the end of the world if I did something and it didn't work. If I asked a girl for a date, she turned me down. Those things became kind of available, and because of that, I enjoyed myself a whole lot more. I left the VA and I got my first community mental health job, and just kind of my confidence was such that I was willing to kind of work to get some of the stuff I wanted, but previously I just thought I would never get, because I had kind of a low opinion of myself. So I ended up liking myself a lot better and being more willing to kind of step into difficult things and work at them.
We saw a lot more ability in you than you did, and then you actually started to live up to that ability. Just him believing that kind of allowed me to believe it, or encouraged me to believe it. And the reason we're asking all these questions to the folks tuning in is it's incredibly important to think about the individual people in our lives who have had a very positive impact on us, and how they did it and what they did and what they didn't do. And so that we're going to kind of keep coming back to that, about like what worked, what didn't work, about someone inspiring us to make some changes for ourselves. So I thanks for going down memory lane there.
Yeah.
I wanted to jump into the spirit of MI. So how would you describe the spirit of motivational interviewing?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, that exercise we just talked about is a kind of quick way to give people a sense of the spirit of MI, because I think we already know it kind of intuitively, that people, when asked this question, and I get the group to list the attributes of the influential person, and the list is almost always the same. It includes being non-judgmental, seeing things in me that other people didn't see, being concerned for me, being willing to give me their time, being a good model of the behavior that they were, that I was trying to develop. Those qualities that we kind of recognize in these influential people is, in some sense, the spirit of MI. If you read a textbook about MI, you'll see things like a good MI relationship feels like a partnership. It's not a one-up, one-down relationship where some expert is dispensing their wisdom to me, but it's somebody who's working with me in the service of my own goals. So partnership, acceptance, this kind of unconditional positive regard, seeing strengths in me that maybe I'm not aware of is part of it. Empathy, showing me that what I have to say and what I think and experience is important, and that they're interested in that and take time to understand me. And that it's a compassionate relationship, which means that it's really based on my need. It's not for them. It's not that, they may get positive things out of it, but that's not why they're doing it. They're doing it that I understand their effort to be out of concern for me. And if those elements are in a conversation, I think that would be within the spirit of motivational interviewing.
So the idea of feeling like you're a partner, the idea of acceptance, I remember thinking about this as, I don't know too much about counseling, but the idea of unconditional positive regard. And I worked with a lot of teenagers where, yesterday they may have said something awful to you that made you feel really bad. And then the next day when you see them, the idea of unconditional positive regard says to just treat them as if, nothing ever happened, and just start from scratch, and just positive acceptance. And it's amazing, once I started to practice that, how different our relationship used to build with some teenagers.
Yeah, and it doesn't require that we forget that, or that we don't realize it was a hurtful thing, but to realize that's not all of them, that came from someplace, and there's still a human being there who has the same wants and needs that I have. Mm-hmm. That it puts it in context, I guess, and that we try to remain willing to meet them at the level of their humanity, not at the level of the insult they gave to me yesterday.
Yeah, whatever emotional state they happened to be in yesterday. Yeah. Try not to get I remember I used to get so tangled up in other people's emotions, but I needed to sort of stay solid, because they needed me to stay solid while they were going through stuff.
Yeah.
And then you brought up the idea of compassion and empathy, all being a huge part of the spirit of MI. Yeah. So we talked about the spirit of MI. Now I would love to know what is non-motivational interviewing, or how would you describe non-MI? Or I've heard you explain this as make them change talk. How would you describe that?
Think about a lot of conversations we've all had over the years with somebody trying to help us change. It often is characterized by a lot of them talking to us rather than listening to us. So the first thing that makes something non-MI is if the listener is doing more talking than listening. That would be contrary to MI, because as I've said, MI is based on the assumption that if I'm trying to change, it's what I hear myself say that's going to motivate me. So you saying a bunch of stuff to me is getting in the way of that. It's taking away a chance for me to hear myself. And a lot of people may be familiar with Gordon's Parent Effectiveness Training book. I don't know, it was written in the 60s or 70s, I think. But he has 12 roadblocks to communication. I think that's a pretty good list of things that get in the way of actually being helpful to somebody trying to change. And they include some obvious things like ordering people around, judging them, threatening them, warning them, giving advice, persuading, but anything that feels kind of like it's a push. You should do it this way, you need to do it this way, listen to me, that kind of stuff. But interestingly, in Gordon's list, there's also one of the items is agreeing, approving, and praising, which I think the first time you see that, you kind of, what's the problem with praising somebody? But I think the notion is those things are still judgments. That if I'm praising you, I'm making a judgment about your worth. And I think that has potential to get in the way, because judgment may be good today, but if I'm your judge, it could be a harsh judgment tomorrow. So part of this is staying out of the judging role, that we want the person to assess their own decisions, their own worth, their own choices. And so I want to stay out of the way of that to the extent that I can. So those things, that I've just listed are among the roadblocks. That anything that gets in the way of the person really attending to their own thoughts and feelings, their own desires, is probably contrary to the spirit of MI.
And it seems like you have to be really focused on where someone's coming from and try to be as in tune as possible to someone's emotional state at the time. And so it brings up the idea of listening quite a bit. There's a lot more, it seems like there's a lot more listening than there is telling. So how would you, in the scope of motivational interviewing, how would you define listening?
We spend a lot of time in the training trying to clarify, listening, we all listen, we all think we know what that means. But one distinction is the listening in the purpose of understanding what the other person's experience is, or is my listening to help me prepare what I want to say next? When I think about my day-to-day listening, if I'm in a disagreement with somebody, I'm often listening to what they say so I can use that in my retort as I'm going to try and persuade them that they're wrong. That would not be listening in MI. In MI, it's listening to understand the other person's perspective, even when that's a perspective that I may fully disagree with. I can still understand it from their point of view. And in MI, I also want to show them that I understand it from their point of view. So I'm gonna do things to kind of give back, to actually show them what I've heard them say and what I understood them to mean from my listening. So listening to understand and showing that I understand is listening in MI. There's one of my metaphor for this is the Chinese character for listen, which is made up of 5 other characters. One of them is ears, but it's also the other 4 characters are eyes, heart, yourself, and undivided attention. And those 5 put together, I think, give you a pretty good picture of what listening is in MI, that we're really there, we're really trying to understand the person's point of view, their experience, and we're using every avenue at our disposal to take that in, our ears, our eyes, our heart, and our attention.
And in a taste of motivational interviewing, how do you get started with the participants, and what questions do you have participants ask themselves as they get started?
Yeah, so we do this exercise in the training that's just to give people, it's called a taste of MI. It's not actually motivational interviewing, but it has the feel of motivational interviewing. And we start out with the first exercise is we ask people, we split the group into pairs, and one partner is the listener or the worker, and the other is in the client role, the person that wants to make a change. And the first time around, we instruct the worker, make them change. We call that part of the training, make them change. And it's the worker's job to persuade them to change, to tell them how to do it. All of that's very much non-MI. The second time through it, we just have them, we switch it, and the worker just asks 4 questions of the person. The person identifies the change they want to make, and the worker says, why do you want to make this change? And listens to the answer. Then asks, what are the 3 best reasons you can think of for you to make this change? Listens to the answers. The third question is, if you were going to make this change, if you decide to really do it, how would you go about it? And hear what they have to say. And the fourth question is just, how important is it to you right now to do this? And hear what they say. So we have them ask those 4 questions. Then we ask the worker to just summarize what they've heard so that the person hears themselves a second time. So the summary would be, you want to make this change for this reason. These 3 reasons all bear on your decision, seem like good reasons to do it. If you're going to do it, here's how you're going to do it. And it's this important, whatever they said about importance. Then the last question is just, so what do you think you're going to do? And kind of said in that tone of voice, not what are you going to do, but what do you think you're going to do? Because it's their decision whether they do anything at all or not. And then in the training, we talk about how did that way of doing it contrast to the first way, the more aggressive way to do it. And people in the speaker role, the one trying to change, talk about feeling quite a bit more motivated than the first time around. First time around, people feel pushed and kind of, get defensive and come up with a lot of yeah, but statements. Yeah, that's fine, but it won't work because. In the second one, there's no one to challenge. It's just all the answers are coming from yourself. So there's no one to argue with. And it's a very different experience, I think.
You talk about the idea of someone challenging someone else. So if someone says, well, I think I'm ready to make this change, you have a person listening to you that might know a lot of things about you and maybe some of your past behaviors, and they might be a little skeptical. And so I'm wondering, I guess with yourself and with someone that you're trying to support, there's this idea of confrontation. So you kind of have to confront the thing that might need changing. So is confrontation the goal of motivational interviewing, or is there a place for confrontation in motivational interviewing, and what is it?
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, there's motivational interviewing was originated by a guy named Bill Miller. And one of my favorite Bill Miller quotes is, confrontation is the goal of motivational interviewing. It is not the technique of motivational interviewing. And this comes out of substance abuse. Now, almost 50 years ago, Bill Miller started his work in the late 70s, early 80s. And at that time, in substance abuse, confrontation was very much the technique of a lot of treatment. The idea was, somebody's got a serious substance abuse issue, it needs to be confronted. They've got an addictive personality, you need to tear down the addictive personality and help them build a healthier one. And confrontation was the way of doing it. And Bill Miller's approach was very different. It was not confrontational in that sense, but it was very confrontational in the sense of the purpose of the conversation was to create a confrontation within the person. So it wasn't a confrontation between the worker and the client. It was a confrontation within the client that involved them getting in touch with what was important to them, what did they really want for their life, and then being willing to take a hard look at where they were headed with their current behavior. And I'm sure many of the listeners have had such a moment in their own lives, and we know that that's a tough moment. If I realize that to get what I want, I'm going to have to do things different, that's a confrontation, and that's a tough spot to be in. So MI is actually aimed at creating the conditions where people become willing to let that confrontation happen, for them to look at somebody who loves his family dearly and is devoted to his wife and realizes, if I keep drinking the way I'm drinking, I'm going to lose my family, right? That's one way to describe motivation. If I realize that to keep what I want, to keep what's important to me, I'm going to have to change, I think I can be said to be motivated, that I'm going to be inclined to do the hard work of changing. So there is a confrontation in MI, but it's not between the worker and the client or the parent and the child. It's within the person trying to decide whether to change.
I mean, that seems like that's where it should be, instead of the confrontation being between two people, or even in the person. Let's say if you're a parent of a teen, if a confrontation's in you of like, what do I do? How do I help my kid? It seems like, where the struggle should be is your child sort of figuring out, how do I help myself, if they're even identifying what their behavior is as a problem.
Yeah.
And I like mantras. I think that I'm a kind of linear thinker where I just sort of like need to do one thing, especially mindfulness meditation is helpful, where you do one thing at a time, clear out some space for your brain. Are there any mantras that help guide your thinking with regard to practicing MI successfully?
Well, that one that I just said, that the confrontation is within them, not within me. When I first ran into that quote, or not between me and them, that helped me understand what my role was, that I need to create the conditions. I need to behave in such a way that the person feels safe enough to actually turn their attention inward and have that conversation with themselves. That's a very risky and vulnerable spot to be in. And if I don't appear to my clients to be a source of safety and support, they're unlikely to become willing to do that. And I think the same can be said with us as parents, that if we feel to our kids as judgmental or critical or harsh, then that reduces the odds that they're going to turn inward and take that hard look at themselves. The second one, I guess, is something called the Michelangelo Belief. And that refers to somebody apparently asked Michelangelo, how do you do that? How do you take a block of marble and create something like the statue of David out of it? And his answer was something to the effect of, I look at the block of marble, I see David within it, and then I remove the part of the marble that's not David. That sounds simple enough. I'm not sure it's not quite so simple. But the metaphor is what's needed is already inside the person, that I don't have to put it into somebody. I don't have to be the smartest person, about whatever the change is. It's there, and my job is to help them find it, not to hand it to them, not to give it to them, not to be brilliant. My job is to be able to have a conversation that allows them to find what's already in them and bring it forth. So those two, I think, help me kind of stay on the path of motivational interviewing.
And as far as concepts, so we can jump into the actual key concepts of motivational interviewing. Could you share some of the key concepts that you've identified that help guide parents or teachers or counselors?
So we've talked about a couple of them already. This idea of autonomy, that it's just that each of us get to decide how we live our lives. And, for us, those of us in the role of parents of teenagers or younger children, that's kind of we feel two ways about that. I mean, there are some, we get to make some of the decisions, but as our kids get older, there are decisions we just can't make for them. When they're out of the house, when our kid gets in the car for the first time and drives off, how safely they drive is no longer in our control. We can do things like restrict access to the car or whatever, but if they're going to succeed, it's going to have to be because they chose to drive safely. And so the question then is, what can we do that makes it more likely that they're going to make good decisions? Because we can't make the decisions for them. So in MI, just recognizing that's fact. I don't have to like it that that's true. Actually, I do like that that's true, but it's true whether I like it or not. People are going to make their own decisions. So can we help them want to make good decisions? Acceptance, I talked a little bit about acceptance already, that in that kind of influential person thing, that it's interesting. If I feel genuinely accepted, it allows me to open up and kind of look at things that I might want to change. If I'm feeling judged and unaccepted, I'm going to stay as closed as I know how to be so that that judgment can't get at me. But if we can actually bring acceptance into our relationships, becomes more likely that people will open up. I already talked about the Michelangelo belief. And then you actually mentioned, Paul, this kind of less is better notion, that the idea that if you agree that it's what a person hears themselves say that's going to change them, then I want to find a way as the worker to say as little as possible to make my point, and get them to talk as much, my client to talk as much as possible about how it looks to them, because that's where the change is going to come from, if it comes. And then a couple other parts of that, one of which is, one of the sayings in MI is ambivalence is normal. And I think that's not an obvious thing. That, we know a lot of people who we think ought to change, but don't appear to be trying to change, whether that's, they weigh more than they like to weigh, they exercise less, they drink too much. We all got lots of things like that. The fact that I'm not changing is not proof that I don't want to change. I think it is evidence that I'm ambivalent about wanting to change. I got reasons to change, and I got reasons not to change. So part of the MI approach is to respect both of those sets of reasons and get those sets of reasons out on the table, and then help the person actually make up their mind is, yeah, you got a lot of reasons not to change, but if the reasons to change are bigger and more important than the reasons not to change, then we'll be moving in the direction of change. So instead of being critical of people or feeling like they're unmotivated if they're ambivalent, that MI just accepts that as part of the process. We have to work through the ambivalence to get to behavior change. There's a phrase in MI called resist the writing reflex. And what that refers to is, for a lot of us parents or human service workers or a lot of teachers, have a desire, when we run into somebody with a problem, we would very much like to be helpful. And often the way we go about being helpful is by offering our advice or our experience or making suggestions. But there's a fair amount of evidence that doing those things more often than not actually makes change less likely to happen. That advice and suggestions are good for somebody who's already decided to take on the change. But most of the time we're talking to people who are not yet decided. They're still ambivalent about making the change. And in that context, telling people how to do it is just wasted breath, because they haven't decided that they want to do it. So when we hear somebody describe a problem, the idea is resist that impulse to help them change until we've gotten to the point that they're ready to change, that they know that the change is important and they're ready to take it on. Then there may be a role for our advice, and maybe not. Maybe they already know how to do it themselves. Yeah, and one final tenet comes from a guy named Daryl Bim, who's a social psychologist, and it's called Bim's self-perception theory. And he did very interesting research. But the self-perception theory basically states that people believe what they hear themselves say. And we often run into people who say, I'm the kind of person who says what he believes. But Bim is saying the reverse is also true, that people hear themselves say something, they're more likely to believe it. And one of his experiments was he took a bunch of college kids who were looking for credit for their psychology classes and had them participate in an experiment in which he handed them a one-page document about some issue that college kids typically don't care anything about. Now, I don't know what that issue was in the actual experiment, but say it was a proposed change to a commercial zoning law in downtown Longmeadow. So most of the kids going to school have no idea what a commercial zoning law is, much less care about it. But he had half the group read a prepared statement in favor of that change. He had the other half of the group read a prepared statement against the change. And then he sent them home. And 2 weeks later, they came back and he had them fill out a questionnaire about all sorts of topics. But some of the questions were about this change to the zoning law. And sure enough, the kids who read the statement against the zoning law were now less in favor of the zoning law change than were the kids who'd read the statement in favor of it. So all that had happened was they had heard themselves read something. They knew it wasn't their opinion. He had handed them this piece of paper, and yet it affected the way they think about it. So the idea is that we want to do things so that people hear themselves arguing for the change, not against the change. And what's interesting, if you think about what I said a minute ago about ambivalence, if people have within them two sets of arguments, one a set of reasons to change another set of reasons not to change, and me as the worker in my effort to be helpful to them, tell them all the reasons they want to change. And I'm very good at it. I get the reasons that are important to them and I say that to them. The unfortunate aspect of that is I've then left them the job of articulating the reasons not to change, because both sets of reasons are alive and well in them. And if I say you should change for this reason, this reason, this reason, I think what I'm likely to hear is, yeah, but what about, and then the list of reasons not to change. And if that's true, if Daryl Bim is right, what I've done is help them talk themselves out of changing. And I don't want to do that. So I want to leave them, I want to evoke it from them rather than try and tell them anything.
So now that we've started to talk about change talk, what are some examples of change talk, and how do we know if someone's, leaning toward the possibility of making some change?
Yeah. So change talk is the word in MI to capture, in whatever form it appears, the client's own reasons to consider making the change, and kind of break it down into a couple parts. We talk about preparatory change talk, which is not a statement of I'm gonna change, but it is a statement of I can see that it might make sense for me to change. So sometimes that shows up in the form of desire. It's just, I really wish I could get off these cigarettes. I just don't want, I'm sick of it. So it's not, they're not given a reason, but they're just asserting the desire for the change. Another form of change talk could be reasons. If I was able to give up the cigarettes, I'd probably have a better shot at making the basketball team, might be a reason. Or I'm worried about the health consequences of cigarettes. Or, cigarettes are expensive. If I quit smoking, I could save a lot of money and maybe get the car I've been looking at, right? That whatever the person's reasons are theirs, right? So if somebody gives us reasons to change, that would be considered change talk. Sometimes it takes the form of what we call need. It's just kind of, there's an urgent sense. I really got to quit smoking. I cannot keep doing this, right? There's just this felt sense of importance. And then finally, there's what's called ability change talk. And if you think about the first three, desire, reason, and need, those all speak to the importance of the change. But just because the change is important, really important, doesn't mean I'm going to undertake it if I don't think I can do it. Right? So the fourth kind of preparatory change talk is ability. That statements that said, it would be hard to get off cigarettes, but I've done hard stuff, and I think I could do this. So people's assertions about their ability to make the change is also considered change talk. And in motivational interviewing, the rule is when you hear somebody making change talk, you try to get more of that. You get really curious about, so somebody says, God, I'm really sick of these cigarettes. I got to get off them. You might just, tell me more about that. What are you sick about? What's the problem with cigarettes from your point of view? The goal being that they hear themselves describe all the ways cigarettes are a problem to them. So that's called preparatory change talk. And the research indicates that the more preparatory change talk a person engages in, the more likely they are to actually make a commitment to change. And then the research is if somebody makes a commitment to change, they're more likely to actually undertake the change. And that, it's not 100% correlation. There are plenty of times people make a commitment, don't follow through, but the odds are better. If people are of their own free will making a commitment to change, the odds of them actually trying to do it are go up. And then that takes us to the other kind of change talk, which is called commitment language. So somebody saying, I really need to quit smoking. I got to get rid of cigarettes is preparatory change talk. The statement, I'm done. I'm giving up cigarettes today is commitment language, right? A statement of commitment. And then kind of corollaries to commitment language are, we talk about activation and taking steps. Activation is a near cousin of commitment language is I'm ready to stop, which if you think about it is, I'm not saying I've stopped, I'm just saying I'm ready to stop. But it's a lot closer to commitment. And then taking steps is sometimes people come in and kind of report having done something that's in the direction of changing, but it's not really the change. So if it's cigarettes, somebody might say, I went out, I cleaned out all the ashtrays in my car. I got rid of all the ashtrays in the house. And, I didn't go to the store, I didn't go to the store to buy cigarettes this morning. I waited till noon till I had my first cigarette. So that's not quitting, but they took some steps in the direction of quitting. So all of those would be things we, in an MI conversation, would want to notice and try to reinforce, try and get them to say more about that. The goal being that person feels like, yeah, I get it. I got good reasons to quit, and I'm gonna do it. So that's kind of change talk.
Well, let's say, okay, you got a teenager, they've exhibited a bunch of change talk. They've even started sharing some of that commitment language you were talking about. What would be a parent or a teacher or a counselor's next step if they started hearing that kind of language?
So initially, it's just to be really interested in that and see if we can engage in a conversation that isn't pushy. Because as parents or teachers, we get excited. Oh, they're thinking about changing. Maybe I can get them to do it. But we don't want to, got to remember, it's not us that's going to get them to do it. So we would want to be patiently curious and just get them to say as much as they could about their reasons for changing or their commitment to change. And if somebody has made a commitment to change, then a good next question is, all right, you're ready to do it. How are you going to go about that? And again, this is something in the beginning of MI, I've heard people who've been involved in MI a lot longer than I've been involved in it, say in the beginning, once we got the commitment, we thought, oh boy, we get to give advice now because they're ready to change. But they soon discovered that wasn't particularly helpful, because the plan, if it comes from the person changing, is just much more likely to be implemented than if it comes from somebody else. So I think the helpful thing is, all right, so you're ready to do this. You're done with cigarettes. So how are you going to go about that? What do you see as the challenges? What's going to be the hard parts of this? To use cigarettes as an example, a lot of people are used to having a cigarette with their coffee or after a meal, or everybody's got times. So the plan maybe ought to include how are you going to navigate those plans? But again, the effort is going to be, from an MI point of view, to try to elicit that from the person making the change. Because if it really comes from within, they know what the barriers are going to be. They know what's going to be hard about it for them. And if we can help them come up with their own plan and just be a supportive presence with that, the odds of them being able to stick to it go up.
Yeah, like what are the ways that they can prepare for that? The triggers that they know are coming down the pike, because everybody has their windows of time where they exhibit these behaviors, especially with the cigarette use.
Yeah.
Well, we're starting to wrap up here, Dr. Brelsford, and so I wondered, what are some inspiring or some motivational quotes that have sort of helped you keep the effort going, keep this work moving forward?
Yeah, so I'm somebody who loves quotes like this, and so I got a bunch of them, but to keep it short, one of them is a quote by the old psychologist, psychotherapist Carl Rogers, who just said, the curious paradox is that it is only when I accept myself just as I am that I become free to change. And I think that captures a lot of the spirit of MI, is that acceptance, to really open up to the hard work of change, is very helpful. To accept myself. I don't have to change. I'm a fully alive, functioning human being as I am. The question is, do I want to change? Not must I change? Do I want to change? And if I can get into that spot, it becomes easier to begin changing. The second one is a quote from Henry David Thoreau, which is, though I do not believe a plant will spring up where no seed has been, I have great faith in a seed. Convince me you have a seed there, and I'm prepared to expect wonders. So I think that's the thing. Do we really believe there's a seed there? If we do, then we want to be doing things that will encourage that seed to grow. And if, many of us are gardeners, we don't plant a seed and stand there and yell at the seed to do the right thing. We give the seed room, and we may do things like fertilize it, water it, pull weeds out of the way. But if the seed's going to grow, it's going to grow itself. So our job is to encourage that, but to also recognize we can't do the growing for them. We can't make our kids grow. We can create conditions that make it likely that they will, but we can't make them do it.
If people have questions, which I'm sure they will, are there ways people can reach out to you and contact you about motivational interviewing?
Yeah, as you said, I got an office in East Hampton. My phone number is 413-433-1775, and my email is jebrelsford@gmail.com. So if you want to get in touch with me, I'd be happy to talk with you about it. There are a couple websites that might also be interesting. You mentioned I'm a member of MINT, which is the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers. There is a MINT website that has a lot of videos, a huge bibliography of articles about MI, and a list of places that if you really want to get an extensive training, places people can go to get the training. These days, we're in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis. There's a lot of training being done on Zoom, so you could connect with a trainer in California if you wanted to learn more about MI. So motivationalinterviewing.org. Motivational interviewing is all one word, .org. And another website I would recommend is the website of the Health Education and Training Institute, which is up in Portland, Maine. That's run by a guy named Steve Andrew, who's the person I learned MI from. And their website is headymaine.org. So that's HETIMAINE.org. And Steve has some online trainings up there and also does a bunch of Zoom trainings. I work for him part-time doing some training on Zoom. And then I guess they could get a hold of you and argue for more training in the Long Meadow School District.
And they will argue for more training, which is wonderful. That's my job. Yeah, well, check out our website. If folks are interested in more resources, you can go to closecommunity.org. That's closecommunity.org/parents, or closecommunity.org/resources, or just start at our website, and there's tons and tons of resources for parents, teenagers, community members, and we have a little blog on there too with all of our social media. Thank you again, Dr. John Brelsford, for taking the time with us today to talk about motivational interviewing. It's always a pleasure, and parents always get a ton out of learning about these steps and listening and being a better partner for change.